Welcome back to Speak Pact. We are excited to bring you some deep insights in the speaking industry today. And my guest is coming from a little bit of a different angle. I think you're going to get some really valuable information from her own journey. So, welcome to the stage, Sherril Harris.
Thank you, Antoniette. I'm so delighted to be here with you and to speak to your fantastic audience, of whom I am one. I really enjoy your podcast.
Well, we love that you're a fan, and we absolutely love that you have joined us today. You come from a little bit of a different angle that I haven't dove into quite yet. Your social and emotional intelligence expertise, and the way that you
Mhm.
help leaders master the dynamics of human connection. And funnily enough, this was not planned, but all morning I was working on an article about exactly that, about the power of connection in the speaking industry. So this is
Wow.
perfect timing. Yep.
Awesome.
You draw on social neuroscience. I would really like to know what that is. So let's talk about that in a second. And I do know what positive psychology is and how important that is. And you're going to show us the path to understanding others, right? We tend to focus on understanding ourselves or understanding a situation, but do we really focus in on understanding that person just on the other side of our face, right? Right there.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so let's dive in. First and
Okay.
foremost, what started you on your joint journey? What got you interested in this space?
It's going to sound a little dramatic, and I suppose looking back, it was when I was in the fourth grade. I was given the Diary of Anne Frank, and it almost seems inconceivable today to think about, the average fourth grader reading such heavy material, but that's how it was in New Jersey in the 1970s. And my aunt used to tell a great story about that winter. She kept watching me walk figure eights in the snow outside her window because she had this nice big open yard across the street from us. And she called my mom and said, "What is she contemplating so deeply?" And at that age, I was trying to put together all of these very extreme pieces, this compassion and cruelty, this chaos, and yet there was still a thread of human connection in there. And that really seeded just a lifelong passion of pursuing what makes people make the choices that ultimately make their lives.
Wow.
What are those drivers behind it? And you
What,
mentioned a
what
moment ago social neuroscience.
mhm. I just real
Yes?
quick for you to have, I don't know, the frame of mind at that young age to even be able to soak in such a story like Anne Frank's and then not
Yes.
just let it pass on by, but to inspire you up into your adulthood is says a lot about who you are.
Thank you. Thank you. And social neuroscience, because you mentioned a moment ago that you were curious to know what that field is, and it is still an emerging field of science, ties in with this because the part that really stuck to my bones early in my life was the crowd psychology of what happened. I remember when my mom finally let me watch the original black and white Frankenstein on TV. I had nightmares, as she had predicted, which is why she kicked
Right.
that can down the road for so long. But I didn't have nightmares about the monster. I had nightmares about the people, about the crowd, the pitchforks and the torches. And so again, there was that theme running through it. And so many, many, many years later, and lots of study at from the spiritual end of things to the super neuroscientific end of things, I stumbled on social neuroscience and I went, oh my gosh, I've returned to my roots. And social neuroscience is the neuroscientific study of how we influence each other when we are gathered together. And I'm going to share a recent study that's just had me on fire with your audience because our audience that we're speaking to today can really use this information. In this particular study, they were studying whether or not the brains of human beings light up differently when we're in the same room together versus when we're virtually. And obviously, the reason I looked at that post 2020 is I wanted to know how I could change the way I deliver my content in one environment versus the other. And in this one particular study, they had parents and adolescent children around 12 have a conversation, and they would have this conversation live in the same room, and then they would repeat a similar conversation while they were, let's say, Zooming. And what they noticed when they wore these really cool skull caps, these really neat, they call them jewel caps, is that when they were in the same room together, there were multiple regions of the brain that lit up very vibrantly. You could really see the interplay of the circuitry between the human beings in the same room. But when they put them in a Zoom setting where they were virtual, they only really saw 1 to 3 areas light up, and they didn't light up as vibrantly as they did live. Now, at the surface, this looks like, oh my gosh, we need to do everything live. But that wasn't what I took away from that. What I took away from that is I have certain advantages when I'm live. And so when I looked through the lens of my business and was deciding, was I going to offer everything virtually? Was I going to offer everything live? Was I going to offer some kind of hybrid model? What are the pieces I think need to be live in order to best serve my client? And what are the things that can be maintained virtually? And I changed my whole business model because of this. So now I'm typically coming into a company that has problems. I joked for years when people would say, you don't have any fancy banners on your social media. And I said, that's because when people call me, there's usually NDAs involved. Okay. I don't get the phone
Right.
call
Right. I can
till
relate to that
stuff
one.
is on fire. Yeah. I was never here. So at the beginning of those reconstructions, those interventions, I really want to be live in the room because number one, I want to be able to feel the energy in the room and who I'm speaking to, and I want them to be able to feel my energy because that's really where the trust building starts. And I'm asking people to challenge some things that they've held dear, sometimes for decades. So I really want to be in close proximity to build that trust. Now, excuse me, that being said, for maintenance, once we get everything up and running the way we want it, and we're in the phase of the relationship where we want to just keep that momentum and do those check-ins and, maybe do a little bit of spot treatment, I call it. Those things can now be done very successfully virtually because I already have that foundation of trust and they know who I am. And I can add layers very successfully without having to crack any coconuts, if
Ooh,
that makes sense.
so much goodness there. Yes, for sure. And you scared me for a moment because I am definitely an introvert and I love the world of Zoom. I love connecting with people in this way. But something that I have noticed, and I wonder if it's connected to this study,
Yes.
is even some of those top, and we rank among the top, but even the top half percent, podcasts, let's say like Joe Rogan, Diary of a CEO, some of the different ones like
Love
that,
it.
they all come from a side view as if
Yes.
two people are sitting at a table.
Yes.
Well, in those instances, they are actually sitting at a table. So maybe those weren't
Yeah.
great. But when we're watching it through a screen, we see their side view. Do you have any? Because I've been contemplating maybe switching up our format, but
Yes.
it's gonna take a lot. And I'm
I
wondering, but all the
personally
top ones do that. So what do you think?
yes. My suspicion is that there may be because those are some pretty smart people. I'm a huge Diary of a CEO fan myself, and I'm also a fan of experiment. I say give it a try because you are looking at some pretty good role models there, and so it makes sense to assume that maybe they know something there. Switch it up and see if you get a different reaction from the audience, if you get a different feedback from the audience. But I also want to say not to leave other introverts like you. And by the way, believe it or not, I am also an introvert. Not to leave any of us introverts hanging here. That study doesn't necessarily say that there's less value in doing it virtually. I made the choices I made about my business by the way I filtered that information. But let me say this for people like you who are either just naturally gifted at getting to the depth and drawing out the authenticity in your guests, or those of us that have cultivated that because it wasn't our natural gift, those are the folks that are still going to be able to get the maximum value out of virtual because those areas of the brain are not lighting up as easily or as brightly as they do in person doesn't suggest that you can't get the same kind of engagement from the audience. You've just got to go deeper and you've got to have more authenticity. Speaking of Diary of a CEO, you will notice he is a master of building teasers where he almost takes you to the punchline and then it drops out. So you're not going to, I used to call them driveway moments. You're not going to stop listening till you get to that juicy part. And that's a way that he is using to boost that brain involvement, that brain engagement that we can somewhat take for granted when we're live and in person.
Ooh, I love that, driveway moments, and it really, because he is a pretty down to earth, not super dynamic
Yes.
personality, if we're gonna utilize him as an example, and it's
Yeah.
like, what does keep, because his shows are long, not quite
Yes.
as long as Joe Rogan's, but they're a good length. What keeps people there? So,
Yes.
those driveway moments are not by accident, they're not a personality quirk, they're actually a psychological strategy. Mm.
Yes, a little tease, a little tickle on the brain, and I suspect that he's had some terrific guidance on how to do that, and that's something all of us can do. So, if you are that person that says, "Hey, I got into this because I want to spend more time at home with my kids or my dog or whatever, and I want to develop a completely virtual business," please do not take from that study that there's going to be less value in you doing that. That's not the case at all. It's just I would encourage you to use that study as the impetus for exploring how can you do it differently with a little bit more depth and a lot more authenticity.
A little bit more depth and a lot more authenticity. Whew,
Yes,
love it.
ma'am.
Recently, I was listening. I love psychology. I'm not in that field, but to me, it's very fascinating. And
Yes.
a lot of people believe that you want to build your why. You want to build your why, whatever your why, and those are important. Your what, your why, all those things. Your who, but that it all starts with, it was a very fascinating angle that this person had. It all begins with authenticity, and I believe in alignment. You need to be in alignment with what you do, what you say, what you devote your life to, and I guess that's the core, right? If you're
Mhm.
on an authentic path, then number one, you can't help but be curious, which curiosity to me is a very important step in success.
Absolutely.
But you also can't help but being interested in the other
Yes.
person. You're not putting it on, you're not faking it. It's real, right?
Yes. And the cornerstone of the way I'm teaching what I teach now really is self-awareness. Back at the beginning, we were talking about we put so much focus on ourselves when really we need to put the focus on other people. To that, I would say yes and no. And here's what I mean by the no. It's the angle of focus we put on ourselves that will determine how well we connect with other people. And the differentiator is, do you understand that the common denominator between every great conversation you've ever had and every lousy one is you? And
Mm.
once you understand that you are the common denominator, that means you can deconstruct what went on there and learn, where do you stop listening? Where do you lose the plot? Where do you stop leaning in and lean back? And once you can observe those sort of milestones in yourself, then you have the power to make different choices. And to your point about curiosity, a big part of that is, and I know you've seen it and your audience has certainly seen it, if not in business, then definitely in your personal life. There's that person that asks you questions, but they either don't listen to the answers or the questions are disconnected in a way that makes them feel disingenuous. Like they're asking some questions that they watched a self-help video years ago and they said you should ask these kind of questions, but they're not coming from a place of authentic curiosity. So I say let yourself off the hook and start with watching where your mind goes when you're interacting with other people. Question that first. And once you've got the lever of that gate where you're able to go, oh, look at me doing that thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go this way. Just on the other side of that is this juicy well of curiosity where you can start experiment with asking people the things you really want to know. And when you start asking people the things you really want to know, they feel truly seen and heard, and they begin to open up in a way that's often unexpected for both of you.
Mm. There was a lot there, and you know what? That's gonna be a very replayed section because you really dropped a lot in there, and it does begin with personal responsibility, right?
Yes.
Conversations, connections,
Yeah.
success doesn't happen. You play a significant role in every aspect of that, and the way that you
Yes.
communicated that was truly brilliant. Cheryl, thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Tell me a little bit about your "be the water, not the rock" approach.
Yes. So I find in my own journey that having pneumatics or tools or mantras, things that will help me in the moment snap myself out of it has been helpful. And so one I developed years ago, and it was quite by accident, was "Be the water, not the rock." And it happened in the middle of a conversation. I owned a production company at the time. And it was a very, very big production with a lot at stake. And some things happened, and there was a major meltdown, and I was having trouble getting everybody who could possibly resolve this problem quickly on the same page because everybody was really stuck in that panic and blame syndrome that so easily happens by default.
Yeah.
And it just came out of my mouth and I said, "People, be the water, not the rock. The problem is the rock. There is no fruit down that hallway. Stop staring at the rock. Look at all this water. This water is solutions." And I noticed everybody just kind of stopped and looked at me. And a few days later, my business partner said to me during a debrief, "That was really good. I've never heard you say that before." And I said, "Say what?" And she repeated me back to me. And I was like, I guess that really is clever. And so I started building on that philosophy. And now, fast forward 30 years later, I've developed a whole methodology around that to help us in those moments when we feel triggered to be able to stop and look inward and recognize what are the mechanics of what's happening inside of us so that we can manage that. Because if you don't manage what's happening inside of you, you can't show up powerfully to what's happening in front of you.
Ooh, okay. All right. I'm going to share a quick story with you that relates exactly to this. So, even
Please.
though you're you may not have developed this specifically for speakers, it's obviously extremely relevant when it because
Mm,
connection is extremely relevant and important to
indeed.
speakers, corporate trainers, thought influencers, right? So
Yes.
I was at a conference. I'm not going to name her name because everybody will know who she is. This was
Okay.
last year, and I don't know, the woman was just striking me wrong this day. I was a fan, but she was striking me wrong. It was everything felt very cliche and the things that she was saying just did not feel authentic to me. I was just feeling like, well, she's gotten into kind of the this she stepped into the stardom side. She's
Yes.
lost herself, and I see that. I see that in speakers where they really
Yes.
reach a next level and they forget to connect with themselves, which is perfectly aligned with what you're saying. So
Yes.
there was a little bit of a question and answer part, and so I posed a question that I felt like was pretty innocent, but I was trying to bring it back to real a little bit.
Yeah.
She literally began arguing with me from the stage,
Ooh.
and I'm not really an arguer or a
No,
confronter.
I don't get that
I just
about you
like
at all.
it's and she wound up pretty much putting me down, in front of everybody, which
Wow.
I've got
I'm so
thick skin.
sorry.
It was totally fine. She made
Yes.
herself look it just was not professional. Anyway,
Yes.
I just thought, first of all, that's the last time I'm spending $1,700 to go to one of her conferences, because
Wow.
she like not because of that alone. I can be challenged because it challenges me. I want to grow. I want to be
Yeah.
challenged. But it was too she lost touch with the foundation with and as
Yes.
you rise, as you as you e- as your career evolves, you should evolve with it, right? That's authentic.
Indeed.
But you don't leave behind that integrity kind of authenticity piece, which I kind of
Yes.
sensed that she did. So this was just a really good illustration. I hadn't actually put it all into words or thoughts. I haven't actually even shared this with my husband, what happened, just because it was just like,
Wow.
wow. I mean, she had a great opportunity there, and
Yes.
it just kind of, ugh.
And I really want to thank you for showing the vulnerability to share that, because I get why that was not something that you were broadcasting after you had that experience. You know, number one, we say, what's the value of sharing any story that could potentially make somebody look lesser than, and you're so not that person. And also, when something has triggered us, those of us that are performance oriented, sort of, I find we quietly do this internal work where we look at it and we say, okay, what can I learn about myself, and then we, move on from it. But if I may, I really love this story because it's got so many layers and so many applications. And what I heard you say was, your experience of that was of somebody who had gathered people into a room to share wisdom and promote growth, and instead you did not get that human sense, that humanity sense, and you felt some resistance, and you put yourself out there. Because I'm sorry, I get very nervous every time I ask a question in public, because it is a moment of vulnerability, and you were greeted with somebody who did not reward you for that courage and vulnerability. And in fact, had you been a more sensitive, vulnerable human being, that could have really kind of scarred you up a little bit, small t trauma. And I really resonate with that, because as somebody who is often in the trenches with clients who are in crisis, I see that a lot in leaders. And I'll tell you what my theory is behind that after years of doing it. And I know you already know this, so thank you for letting me use this as a possible teachable moment for your audience. Whenever I see a person in a power position who is coming at me in a way that makes me uncomfortable or makes me look bad. And let me tell you what, I've spent a lot of my career as the only woman in a room, so I've had a lot of that.
Yeah.
What I've learned is behind that is someone who is in pain. Sometimes it's insecurity. Sometimes somebody is going through something in their life and they're trying to be that public person that is expected of them, and they're not processing what's happening behind the scenes in a healthy way. So it gets distorted and it comes out thorny, and it's like a blade cutting everyone around them. And sometimes they're not aware of the damage they're doing, and sometimes they're aware of the damage they're doing and they can't even stop themselves. So, what I love about self awareness, and the self awareness that you demonstrated here, is it doesn't matter what's coming at you. You always have the power to manage what's happening inside of you. And even if you can just get out of the room gracefully, that's huge. Give yourself a huge round of applause for that, because it can take decades for some of us, depending on the experiences we had in early life, to evolve to that. And I hope you will keep doing the self inquiry, because ultimately there's tremendous power in looking at someone in a situation like that, and instantly, without even having to remind yourself, instantly be able to open your mind to the possibility that this is what suffering looks like.
Mm. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
this is
that's
what
such wisdom.
suffering looks like.
It is such wisdom. And I thank God for the grace to really feel that in the moment.
Yeah.
I didn't, I was okay. I was just like, I don't have anything more to learn from this person. Anyway, like that was the
Yes.
moment. Um, be, just because, you know, there are seasons when we look to certain people and certain organizations, certain places to get
Yes.
to rise to a level of growth.
Yes.
And then we go, and that was the moment that told me this is where she's stuck. And
Yes.
you're exactly right.
You did make it personal.
Let's take this a step further. This is a really great conversation, Cheryl, and you're the
Awesome.
right person to have this conversation with. When you
Thank you.
put yourself in the spotlight, you are going to be triggered. You're going to be
Yeah.
criticized.
Yes.
As you rise, you get onto bigger stages, as you get bigger social media audiences, the comments,
Yes.
right? How do you balance there's going to be negative people. There just are.
Yes.
And for every one negative person, it feels like 100, when actually everybody else is all about, they're really getting that impact and that message you intended to put out there. And it is
Yes.
transforming their lives. But for some reason, we hone in on that one person being a ridiculous human being. So how do you
Yes.
deal with that?
Because neuroscience has been such a hot topic the last few years, I don't doubt that this first thing I'm going to say is going to come as news to a lot of people, but it definitely bears repeating here. And that's your brain on its default mode is it has a negativity bias. Your brain's, or your, I'm going to use the word mind instead. Your mind's number one function is to keep you safe. And it does that by spotting danger. And when it sees danger, it goes, "Oh, look at that. Don't go there. Oh, look at that. That's bad. Oh, look at that. Don't do that again." So your mind is not wired for you to thrive. It's only wired for you to not die. All right. That's
Ooh,
its
that's good.
primary goal.
Not wired for you
Yeah.
to thrive, just wired to protect you, right? Wired for you to not die. I love that.
Yes. I said in conferences, your brain's default setting is to not die and make more of you. And that explains so many of our default choices, right? So you can't count on the mind's default programming to tell you the truth because that's not its job. Its job is to amplify what's in front of it and err on the side of safety. So you have to be very conscious when you have those feelings to recognize, oh, that's just my mind trying to keep me safe. That's not necessarily the truth. And not project, drop it like it's hot. Be willing to just go, whoo, somebody did
Mm.
not like me and just release it. And people say, oh, Sherril, that's so much easier said than done. Yes, it is. And that's where we each individually have to come up with what our grounding practices look like. Some people can, take a moment of a meditation and deep breathing and, push it out into the earth through your feet. Some people pick up a phone and call a trusted advisor or a friend and vent it out until they feel like they can release it, but just drop it like a rock. So that's the obvious and the practical. Now I want you to toggle to the possibility here. None of us got into this swimming pool to just, do the lazy river. Okay. We did not jump in with our inner tubes and our barbecue and say, we're just going to float on down the road. We got into this business, most of us, because we saw a problem and thought, I can make a difference there. I can fix that. Right. So we are an army of people who are passionate about what's possible. And not everybody can see what's possible because not everybody is self-aware. I have a study that I'm about to put up on my website that talks about how 95% of the people in the world believe they are self-aware, and the truth is only about 15% are. So when you're standing in front of somebody and you're coming out with your fantastic ideas, I'm pretty sure that some of your ideas are going to be confronting to some people.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that you're asking people to think differently about something they really feel certain they know a lot about. And if they're taking that personally, no matter how kindly you said it and how well intentioned you were, it's not your responsibility how they receive it. And so you really can't be swimming in these waters if you are not willing to be a confronting force for good. I have to say, I my favorite company I ever worked for, I had the great honor and privilege of working for years with a gentleman named Lior Arusi, who for me is just the top of the world when it comes to exceptional customer service. And he
What's
had a
his name
beautiful
again?
little company. Lior Arusi. He has written
Leor
just a
Arusi.
catalog of books about customer experience. And again, it was such a privilege to work with him. And at the time, he had another leader in his company named Steve Cohn. And Steve and Lior together were this amazing force. And they did something I'd never seen anybody in business do before. They told me, hey, if you don't occasionally get pushback from a client, if you don't even maybe occasionally get thrown out of the room, you are not working hard enough for your client's growth.
Mm.
And I had a chance to test that because, as a trainer, as a facilitator, as a speaker, I had never had anybody say that to me. And I got into a situation with a client who I could really see the path through. I saw it on the first day. I was really excited, but there was a lot of systemic rigidity in there, and not everybody in the room was delighted that they had, embarked on this journey.
Mhm.
Not everybody was happy to see me, Antoniette. And so the resistance was really apparent in that room. And I thought, okay, so am I going to pull back and take their money and kind of just leave them a little bit better than they were, or am I going to be courageous? And I pulled the courageous card. And that client asked me to leave. And believe it or not, and this doesn't give away who they are, this was over an argument about asking their employees how they wanted to spend the $10,000 that the company allocates every year for their holiday party.
Wow.
And they were offended that I had suggested that they should ask them as though their employees couldn't possibly know what's good for them. And so that I was asked to leave. I was asked to take my stuff and get out. Well, one of the senior leaders in that room 3 months later, and I had told Strativity, if they want me back, I'll go back. I feel really obligated to see it through to the end. One of those senior leaders 3 months later called and asked for me by name. And when I came in, he had me come in a little early so he could take me on a tour and show me all the things that they had initially rejected that they decided to give a try, and they got such an amazing result from it that the one gentleman in particular who was the one that asked me to leave, he said, "Go ahead and call her. Go ahead and bring her back in." So that's
Wow.
why we signed up for this. Be courageous.
That's why we signed up for this, to make a difference, right?
Yes.
And you're not making a
Yes.
difference when you're just saying what everybody else is saying.
Yes.
Since we're dropping names, Larry Wingett is someone I follow just because he's the complete opposite of who I am. And he basically
Yes.
says something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing. I went to one of his
Yeah.
conferences, actually about three of his conferences, but in one of those conferences, he said something along the lines of, if you haven't pissed somebody off from the stage, like if you're on the
Yes.
stage, you're giving a talk, you haven't pissed somebody off, you haven't done your job. And I
Amen.
there's a big difference between trying to piss people off or, trying to
Yes.
upset somebody and really
Yes.
trying to bring forth maybe uncharted territory that makes people
Yes.
uncomfortable. New ideas,
Yes.
new innovations that people aren't quite ready for just yet, like you did. I mean,
Indeed.
it would seem pretty basic. First of all, can't imagine they weren't excited to see you from the get go, but they already had a problem just by that. Right? They already
Yes.
had some resistance happening. And then when you
Yes.
said, really, what was foundational? Let's ask the people. um,
Yes, let's talk to them.
there was a lot of pride, obviously, going on in
Yes,
that
it
room,
pride is a good word for it, yes.
and they
Yes. What
drank the cup and decided, huh, maybe maybe there's some wisdom in there.
Yes, and when you are putting things out there sometimes to people who, again, their identity is built on what they know and what they know well, it can sometimes be received as you are trying to tell me I'm doing it wrong, you person that just got here and does not really fully understand my company. And so once I understood that and I got courageous and I got comfortable with being courageous, I found that I developed the ability to hold the space better, and I haven't been thrown out of a room yet. I'm willing to be thrown out of a room in the future, but I suspect that what I've learned about holding space is going to reduce the chances of that happening as I continue to choose courageously to advocate for my customers' growth.
I think that could be sensed, being willing to say the
Indeed.
hard truths, being willing to
Yes.
take the heat for that. I think people really
Yes.
respect that and they want it because we all
Yes.
hear the same kind of regurgitated information. We're looking for the information beyond that. And I
Yes.
love this line, and I'll likely quote you because we do pull quotes from these
Please.
episodes. Be comfortable with being courageous.
Yes.
That's a big sentence in a few short
It's
words.
huge.
We
It's
want to
huge.
please. We are innately like that brain, protect me, right? We don't want to step out of bounds. We want to just kind of go with the flow, and that basically gets you where the flow's going, right? Which is generally
Indeed.
they're coming to you to switch to shift that flow. So really, really love those lines you said.
Thank you. And being able to recognize in that situation, it could have felt like a failure. In a different context, if I had not had the support of management at Strativity, that would have echoed for me as a failure. But instead, I was able to process, just because someone isn't ready to receive what you're generously giving them does not mean it's a failure. It's not a no, it's a not yet.
And not yet, not a
And
no.
and we've
It's a not
we
yet.
have all it's not a no, it's a not yet, and we've all been on the giving and receiving end of this. Think about in your own lifetime. I can think of times in my own lifetime where someone has told me a hard truth and I wasn't ready to receive it yet, and I am happy happy that it bothered me enough. I know it's kind of a weird word, but I was happy that it bothered me as much as it did because it told me that there was a grain of truth there. And I kept chewing on it and I kept chewing on it and I kept chewing on it. And years later, I found the grain of truth. So that little bit of irritation, that little bit of resistance is often your mind's way of telling you that there's truth there. And if you can be open to receive it, terrific. We're not always open at the optimal time. Take it away with you. And then remember to flip that script when it's you delivering the truth and hold the space for somebody might not be ready. Doesn't make it less true. They may not be ready. And their being not ready doesn't mean it's not going to land. Look at that story 3 months later when they asked me to come back. One of the things I love about life in general, but particularly in the speaking world, Antoniette, and I know you've got your own experiences with this, is we will never truly know what our impact is that we've had on people. I have run into people years later, both personally and professionally, that have quoted me back to me at a particular time, and I've said, "Wow, really? I've said that? That sounds really smart." And they've told me what they unpacked about that, but they didn't unpack it right away. And so it was really beautiful. And the first time it happened, it really got me thinking, I wonder how often that happens because I see it in my own life where I met somebody once or I saw a speaker, heard a speaker, and something they said stuck with me and it did change me. It kind of pushed me off in another direction. And they might never know that they had that impact. So I love that. I love those nuances of human interaction, the way we're influencing
Mhm.
each other without necessarily intending to.
Yeah, and you were working with obviously, you're with your background, you understood the depths of that, or at least at a deeper level.
Yes.
But to have a company back you and not say,
Yeah.
"What? You were thrown out? We're gonna go send Fred," right? But for them
Yeah.
to understand you have the right instincts, you had the right information from them, they just weren't easy. They weren't ready to accept that. And I hope
Yes.
that speakers grasp that. It's such an important concept. Just because there's popular frame of thought, there's a
Yes.
proper approach to a strategy, doesn't
Yes.
mean you can't come at it differently. As a matter of fact, you should if you have a
Yes.
solution that works that's different. This whole conversation has given me new insights into something you wrote to me. I'm going to read it. I understand it a little bit better now. And so I'm just going to read it out loud. You said, be the water, not the rock. It's an approach to solving people problems.
Mhm.
Okay. Be the water, not the rock approach to solving people problems empowers us to manage the resistance inside of us so we can show up powerfully to the situation in front of us.
Yes.
That's a whole book in a paragraph. So touch on that just a little bit more.
Yes. So I told the story earlier about how that came to be. It was just sort of a happy accident. But I recognized throughout the arc of my career, and if I could just back up a little bit, I've probably like many of your listeners, I've had kind of a weird winding route. I had years that I was in luxury fashion, and then I was in television, and then I was in elite corporate events. And then I sort of found my way into coaching and then leadership. And so I eventually found my way here. And I noticed that all along the journey, and serial entrepreneurs can really identify with this because we have 1,000 different bosses and 1,000 different people that we serve, as opposed to people that go into an office every day and see the same people and have the same to-do list, so to speak. So we run into a resistance more frequently. I noticed all along the journey, whenever I ran into resistance, when I managed the resistance inside of myself first, and the way I did it is I used a question. I would immediately, when I felt resistance, I would say, where is the error in my thinking? What don't I know that if I did would change how I feel about this moment? And I evoked that profound curiosity. And then I started throwing things at the wall. Could it be this? Could it be that? And that brings me to my favorite thing in the world to talk about, and that's the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to assign character issues as the cause of someone's behavior when we don't agree with it. But when we are demonstrating the same behavior, it's always the circumstances. So Joe is late for work because Joe is selfish and irresponsible. But when I'm late for work, there's too much construction in Florida, is a good example, right? And so the fundamental attribution error often leads us when we feel discomfort, when we've been provoked, or when we've been triggered, or when we've been disappointed, to look at the other person and begin to make up a story about them that not only doesn't serve them, it doesn't serve us. And the minute we do that, we start strangling possibility,
Mm,
because that part of the brain we talked about earlier that wants to protect us kicks in. And usually where it goes is that person is bad, we are good. This thing that happened to us was bad. That shouldn't have happened to us. And then we're not looking for the way to thrive here. There's no way through, there's no new possibility. So when we can manage that conversation inside of us and really question it deeply, and you start throwing things against the wall, like for instance, somebody cuts you off in traffic, you go, oh, they're so rude. If you play this little game with yourself where you're like, okay, what are 10 other reasons that person cut me off in traffic? They've got a sick child in the back of the car, and they're trying to get to a hospital. They just received word this is the worst day of their life, and they're just having an irresponsible moment. You start practicing throwing things against the wall. Where it will take you is not only this deep well of self-compassion where you recognize it's really hard humaning sometimes when things don't go your way. But remember that promise I made you earlier that the path to understanding other people starts with understanding yourself? You begin to empathize with other human beings. You begin to look at, oh my gosh, it's hard for everybody. Life is just hard sometimes. And when you can get to that place where you're looking at somebody through that intensely compassionate lens, that's where I call them self-inflicted miracles happen. That's where you suddenly feel this drive to make a really courageous choice and reach out and bridge the distance and invite people to a conversation or make a suggestion or ask for forgiveness, whatever the situation calls for. And when we have those real moments of authenticity that are unscripted and just feel incredibly sincere, and we've all had them, so we know what they feel like, that's where the magic really happens.
such an important reminder now more than ever, right? We forget to think the best in others. And it
Yes.
is hard humaning. I love the way you put that. Uh, and we get calloused without even realizing it. We jump to the worst possible reason why that person's being a flippin' jerk.
Yeah,
Instead of what they might have just heard they lost their job.
indeed.
They might have just gotten their power kick cut off. Who we have
Yep.
no idea what somebody else is going through. And the moment we can be, I guess, solid in ourselves enough to
Yes.
give space for other
Yes.
people's behaviors, even if they aren't maybe appropriate in the moment, just give
Yes.
space for that and try to think of the best. I love the way that you put that. What is that? I'm going to read that word one more time. Attribution error,
The
fundamental
fundamental
attribution error.
attribution error.
So
Yes.
so next time somebody pisses you off, think of
Yeah.
10 good reasons why they may have lost momentary judgment
Yes.
at that time.
Circumstances, not character. Circumstances, not character. And I'm gonna out myself right here. I'm a deeply emotional person. I was an extremely emotional child, which was really hard on my mom because my mom is a very pragmatic person. And throughout my life, I have ended up being that person who has just lost it. Okay. Whether I am just that really difficult customer or whether I am that friend who is just, what they call trauma dumping, whatever it is, I have had those unhinged moments. And I'm so grateful for those people. And I remember them all who, in those moments, granted me grace. Because instead of seeing a person who was loud or who was rude or who was unreasonable or, who was whatever, they chose to see somebody who was suffering, somebody who was in pain, somebody who felt lost, somebody who felt alone. and they leaned into me. I had an experience in an airport many years ago, and I've told the story in its entirety from the stage, but just a little capsule for your listeners. I was met by a gate agent when I missed a flight, and I had a complete meltdown. Thank God this was before people had cell phones. And she really surprised me. Instead of, saying, "Well, lady, you better pull yourself together and lower your voice and don't talk to me like that." Do you know this woman came out and hugged me, Antoniette? She
Wow.
hugged me. She came out from behind the counter and she hugged me. And
Wow.
at the end of my day, when I was able to get on that much later flight, I had to ask her, where did that come from? Where did you get the fortitude and the self knowledge to be able to switch into that? And she said, "Look, lady, I don't know your problems, but I know what pain looks like when I'm looking at it. And I saw a person in pain, and you looked like you needed a hug." And she had said to me, "Drop your bags." And I thought, "Oh my God, she's going to take a swing at me."
Or put me in cuffs, whatever.
Dragged me away at security, and I dropped my bags, and then she said, "I'm gonna hug you, and you're gonna let me." And there was like 25 people watching, and I just melted into this woman's arms, and I was so grateful for that. And so part of my mission has been able to give that back every opportunity I get. We cannot stop ourselves from assuming about other people. It's hardwired into us for safety reasons. But if you can't stop yourself from assuming, you can choose to assume generously
Ooh,
every
if you
time.
can't stop yourself from assuming, you can
Yes.
choose to assume generously. Cheryl, I can keep going an hour longer with you, and I'm going to be respectful of your time, but we'll have to have you back.
Thank
There's
you.
so much more. I had other questions lined up. There's so much more that I'd love to dive in, but you bring an element that is vital in the speaking space that is kind of viewed as nice but not necessary. And I believe the opposite. I believe it's very necessary. And that is giving that extra space really, really quick recently. And I really try to avoid this kind of thing. But there was this
Yes.
online exchange in a certain group room. And it was one of the taboo subjects. So you just don't go into, right?
Yes.
But somehow we got into it and other people jumped in and it became this, battlefield. So I was trying to back my way out of it, just get on out of there.
Bless your
And this
heart.
one lady just came unhinged at me. And it was over the slightest little thing. And
Wow.
something inside of me said, somebody hurt her. Somebody
Oh,
really hurt her. Because it was just
wow.
a paragraph by paragraph thing to like a one sentence that I had
Yes.
said. And I just said, and in her paragraph, she said something along the lines of, um, and that group of people loves to yell at people or whatever. I don't remember exactly, but I basically wrote back her name. I'm very sorry you were yelled at any point in it in a way that
Yes.
hurt you.
Yes.
And I wasn't being demeaning, and I was worried that it would be looked at like that. Do you know she DM'd me, and we've actually become friends? She
I am not surprised at all because it was so generous of you. That was beautiful and courageous too, because a lot of people would have just backed away, but you leaned in and you did something generous and courageous. And I applaud you for that.
and I hadn't even heard your talk yet. I
See,
hadn't
you
even
just
heard
embodied it.
this so no, that was a really good illustration of what you're saying. And
Yes.
I think that there are going to be many opportunities as you grow, as a
Mm.
corporate trainer, especially, but
Yes.
definitely as a speaker or just as a personality in the spotlight on different social networks.
Yes.
People would love just human nature. It's not right. It just is. They love to
Yes.
pick apart the people who are maybe in an enviable position or excelling beyond where they might feel that they are, and
Yes.
you will be you're in the spotlight. There's nothing to hide, right? Everything, every little flaw, every little trip up shows, and there are people
Yes.
who are quick to jump on that. So these strategies are so important to your continued growth so that you can continue to do more good in the world, continue to
Yes.
create bigger impact. And when things are thrown at you, maybe demonstrate that more beautiful human way to
Yes.
approach situations like that. So, to that end, if you want to dive deeper into this subject and grow in your own skills in this area, definitely reach out to Cheryl. And Cheryl, what's the best place you like to be found?
You can reach me at LinkedIn or on my website, which is sherrilharris.com. And I have to tell you, Antoniette, I love helping other speakers grow, especially emerging speakers, because I'm so grateful to all the people that reached out and helped me in my journey. So if I've said anything today that has sparked something in you that you're like, I have a question. If my helping you with that question can help rock you out of the mud and move you forward, don't be shy. I have nothing to sell you. So light me up on LinkedIn or on my website. I have all my contact information there, and be courageous about asking your question, because nothing lights me up as much as knowing that something I gave somebody helped them get the future that they were creating for themselves. So I would love to have that blessing.
People can kind of read more about what you're about, find you. Mhm.
And forgive me because our sound dropped out a little bit there. There was
Uh-oh.
a question right before that.
Yeah. So LinkedIn, and where else do you like
Yeah.
to be found? So Cheryl, spell your name. It's very unique.
Thank you. It's a weird one. Sherril at Cheryl, same weird spelling, Sherril, Harris, conventional spelling, Harris.com.
Okay. Now for our signature question as we close. We are
Yes.
on a universal pact to create the biggest impact in this world that we can. And of course, in my world, that's with the power of your voice. What is one challenge you would give to the Speak Pact audience today that they could just put into practice without a whole lot of effort? If they would just put this into practice over and above your fundamental attribution error.
Yes. Well
Okay,
done.
you'll have to say that. Over and above that, what is
Yes.
something that else that they can start putting into practice that can really begin moving the dial in their professional life and maybe even in their personal life?
Be willing to be experimental. And years ago, when I was in the modeling business, I was really feeling the rejection hard. I almost got out of it. And I had an amazing booker named Lorraine who sat me down one day and said to me, I want you to change the focus of what you do every day. And I said, okay. She said, from now on, your job is to collect no's. All I want you to do is go out and at the end of the day, call me with all the no's you got. And when I stopped looking for the approval and just started looking for how much contact could I make, amazing things started to happen. So it gave me a back door, so to speak, into my courage. Go out there and collect no's. Go out there and put yourself in a vulnerable position. Go out there and be willing to do it messy. Think differently about it. And I promise you, you will begin showing up differently.
Brilliant close to this episode. I will tell you, we do, our Speak Pact audience knows we do not pre-rehearse and we don't really compare notes. We have
Yes.
a quick chat before we begin and we dive right in. And that to me, Cheryl, is the number one determinator of who's going to make it in the industry and who's
Yes.
not going to make it in the industry. The person
Yes.
who says, "Oh my gosh, I sent out 50 engagement requests this month and I got 7 responses and 5 of them were no's. I'm giving up."
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Instead of the person who says, "I sent out 50 engagement and requests this month. I got 7 responses
Woo.
and 3 of them were positive," right?
Yeah.
It's just a whole, that's the person who's gonna make it.
Indeed. Exactly.
All right, love it. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This has been a joy.
All right, and look Cheryl up, give us both flowers by liking, sharing, post this forward, and, comment, what did you get out of this episode today?
Yes,
Thank you
please.
all. Ciao, ciao for now.